My name is Jānis Valberts. I work for independent, non-profit, solutions-oriented NGO Bellona Europa, and I will moderate this event. We are happy that together with Danish Shipping, we managed to organize this truly high-level, world-class roundtable as part of Ports2Decarb Project. We are going to reflect on recently released industrial carbon management strategy, but also zoom in ports, specifically on a port's role for captured CO2 transportation potentials and opportunities along the whole CCS value chain. This would have not been possible in the first place without support of a member of the parliament, Bergur Løkke Rasmussen, and his office hosting this event. Mr. Rasmus, would you be so kind to kickstart this event with your opening remarks?
Thank you so much, Jānis. Thank you for the kind words, and welcome to all panelists and participants, both here in the room and also online. I have three key words for this small opening speech, which is participation, expectations, and responsibility. First, participation. I have noted that today's topic, we have more or less all key stakeholders present today. That is very impressive, and I also want to thank Bellona and Danish Shipping for arranging and co-hosting this roundtable with me. I am certain that the panel will exceed my expectations and give direction for both the EU institutions and the industry with your active participation in the discussion today, which means moving to expectations. The Council and the European Parliament have agreed on an ambition through the Net Zero Industry Act to establish a storage capacity of at least 50 million tons of CO2 per year by 2030, which is then to be increased to 280 million by 2040. The strategy, as you probably all know, is named the Industrial Carbon Management Strategy, and it sets the framework for the ambition to build an internal market for CO2, benefiting both employment and achieving the EU's climate goals of 90% reduction in greenhouse gas emission by 2040. I see the Industrial Carbon Management Strategy as a tool to act on the Net Zero Industry Act agreement. A complete action plan and regulation will follow in the new political cycle after we've had a small election in June. It is positive that the Commission is now taking significant steps towards establishing an internal market for capturing, transporting, utilizing, and storing CO2. Now, there's a need to establish the necessary international agreements and frameworks so that scale can be increased and companies can confidently make necessary investments in ships, infrastructure, and other things. Carbon as a commodity has the potential to become a new European business adventure. And this leads to the third keyword, responsibility. To create the right setting for the adventure to start, I would like to turn the spotlight on an important piece in the carbon management puzzle, the role of ports. The European ports are key enablers to connect different CO2 transportation modes and to ensure intermediate storage between them. Therefore, I'm very happy that we've managed to include a link between carbon capture and storage and ports in the EU port strategy that I negotiated on behalf of my group, Renew Europe. The resolution, and now I quote, stresses the vital role ports play in the energy transition and set out in the EU Green Deal as energy hubs for conversion, conditioning, and storing of energy carriers for energy generation, for the import of critical raw materials as carbon capture and storage hubs, as serving stations and manufacturing hubs for offshore energy facilities, and as nodes in transport systems supporting the energy transition. So it is in here in the new EU port strategy that it is carbon capture and storage hubs, these ports. It is my hope that our roundtable discussion will help explore what actions and responsibilities can be taken by the EU, the ports, and related players in those industrial clusters to unlock some of the major bottlenecks to kickstart the carbon capture utilization storage business adventure. I look very much forward to hearing the inputs today, and thank you so much for the word, Jānis.
Thank you. So now, building on the comprehensive policy and regulatory framework Mr. Rasmussen just outlined, I would like to open the roundtable where we will touch on two types of questions. One will be policy and regulations and recently released industrial carbon management strategy and the role of ports as part of transport value chain. And the second, to put ports on a spotlight as a key enabler to connect different CO2 transport modes, to explore what actions can be taken by ports, with ports, within the industrial clusters, the whole ports ecosystem, and even beyond that, and to see what are those bottlenecks for the market to grow as soon as possible. I'm very pleased to introduce speakers for today. We have Anne Boudry, Senior Policy Advisor at European Seaports Organization. We also have Sophie Cypers, Public Affairs Advisor at Port of Antwerp Bruges. We have Johanna Fixdal from DG Energy. We have Rob van der Meer, Industry Policy Director at Sembiro. We have Evita Gosha, board member of cement producer Schwenk Latvia, also one of the European Climate Pact ambassadors. We have online Spiros Leusis, Chief Commercial Officer at Shipowners Capital Product Partners, who are building designated CO2 ships. And finally, we have Peter Hinsberger, Senior Regulatory and Public Affairs Managers at Ineos Energy Denmark, partner of Green Sand Project. Now, let's start discussion with you, Johanna, if you don't mind. And if you could provide insights from Commission's perspective on the industrial carbon management strategy and expected role from ports, with ports, within the industrial clusters, what is expected and how we can reach those targets to get to net zero finally.
Sure. So thank you for giving me the floor and thank you for inviting me. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Johanna Fixdal. I work in DG Energy in the Commission in the CCS team. So we have been preparing the ICMS that you know, and also together with Daniel and colleagues in DG Klima. So why do we need ports? I don't think we should say why we need them. But from DG Energy, one of the key messages of the strategy is that transport infrastructure is a key enabler, binding all of these different pathways or value chains together. So the overarching aim is, as you said in the beginning, to create a single market for CO2 in Europe, so that the CO2 can flow freely across borders, across different transport modes, and also across these different pathways, being it more traditional fossil CCS or CCU or industrial carbon removals. And in order to accomplish this, we see a clear need for coordination and harmonization on an EU level. And this is why we intend to start the preparations for a possible regulatory package, both for transport and storage for CO2, and initiate work on network planning and integration. So although urgent action is needed, at the same time we need to ensure flexibility, for example, in terms of standards, because we acknowledge that countries have very different starting points, and we should also avoid the risk of over-regulating a nascent market. So how we see the infrastructure being developed, we don't know this, of course, right now, because it's basically non-existent. But it's a good opportunity, I would say, to design it right from the start. I'm Norwegian, and in Norway we say that if you have the ski jumpers, you have to make sure that you jump straight out from when you jump. So we have to prepare first before we jump, so we don't crash. So I think we're doing the preparations now. And the CO2 transport networks in Europe, I think will look a bit different from how we have seen them in the US. For example, highlighted by the International Energy Agency, we see that there is a clear role for hubs or clusters. So in order to achieve this, we will have a clear cross-border dimension showing this international character of the CO2 network. So while pipelines in many cases are the most common transport option for CO2, the capital costs are, of course, very high and with long lead times. So in the strategy and also in line with the study done by the Joint Research Center, we see a clear role also for CO2 shipping, because there are different issues that we need to solve. Uncertainty regarding future volumes, complicated coordination across the value chain, and long permitting procedures. These are all barriers for investors to move ahead with the projects. We see a lot of plans, but we need FIDs as well. And how we see it being developed is that initially we think that the CO2 transport network will be developed at local, regional, or national levels and to be designed to accommodate the transportation needs of many different CO2 sources. However, over time, we believe that this network will expand to connect CO2 sources with also distant storage sites, forming this comprehensive trans-European network. And as I said, especially in the early stages of carbon management deployment before 2030, other transport modes will be very important. And I just want to highlight some of the key findings from the study done by the JRC. Maybe you already read it, but I think it clearly shows the key role of ports as well. We see that the future European CO2 transport network could reach a length of between 6,700 to 7,300 kilometers by 2030, and up until 19,000 kilometers by 2050. So in terms of costs, we see a range between 6.5 billion and 19.5 billion euros by 2030, rising to between 9.3 billion euros to 23 billion euros in 2050. And a key thing here is that early adopters of the network will have a significant impact of the subsequent developments and the evolution of the network, as projects later will plan their routes in order to minimize the costs. So it's a clear responsibility for these first-of-a-kind projects as well. But we see that there is a good way also to bundle the different emissions. For example, we have seen Antwerp at Sea and different other projects trying also to do this in a cost-optimized way, and also to get the economies of scale for the transport. So yes. I think in general we see a clear role for ports and for hubs in general in Europe. This will be very important to connect different emitters and also to make sure we have a diversity of transport modes. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Indeed, we need preparation and final investment decisions, and I think it's good place for Peter to jump in as from the CO2 storage operator side. You know, there will in Europe we have a lot of ports, but what will be required from ports to be a relevant partner in CO2 value chain. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, thank you. Just to introduce myself, I'm Peter Hinsberger from Ineos Energy, and we are looking, as you said, into storage of CO2, and it's quite far. Last year, we actually managed to transport captured CO2 from Port of Antwerp to the Danish part of the North Sea and store it offshore to mitigate climate change. So that was the world's first, and of course something we are very proud of. And we are looking into taking the next step and hopefully doing so already next year. And you can say we see the ports as having a vital role if we are to obtain all the climate goals set in NCEA before 2030. Because it doesn't make any sense to actually establish storage facilities or capture anything if you can't transport anything. So without connecting the dots, we have nothing. And now we can see that pipelines, of course, will be vital in the future, but it's also very costly and takes time to establish. And there will be parts of the EU not connected to such an European pipeline infrastructure for a very long time. And we should not leave any European members behind. So, of course, we need flexibility in the transportation in the future. And here we can see that ports and ships play a vital role. But it is, of course, important that the ports are helped, supported by de-risking their capex investments, just like we need support to ship owners to actually establish a European CO2 fleet, because that is lacking for the moment. So we are engaging with Danish harbors for the moment, looking into what should be established to actually enable a full value chain in the near future. And what we can see is, of course, you need offshore terminals where you can offload and you can also bring in CO2 from other parts of Europe. And you need intermediate storage. This is, of course, costly. And you have a lot of upfront payment to face. And that is the problem for the moment. Everybody is looking for very long contracts with each other. And nobody wants to actually have that, because there's a bit of uncertainty when we actually have a market that can pay for CCS or CCU. So we know what needs to be done, but to do it is another thing. But we are still optimistic.
Thank you, Peter. Now we can go to the other stakeholder in this market. And as you initiated the conversation on CO2 fleet, I could invite Spiros from ship owners' perspective to share what you would expect ports can do to enhance this emerging market, how we can align technical specifications, how we can possibly drag down the cost, and maybe even if you could go a little bit on technical side and provide your technical pros and cons on low pressure or mid level pressure CO2 systems, and which is your preferred way to move forward. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, and pleasure to be with you. Thank you for the kind invite, and hopefully next time I'll be able to join in person as well. It's for us, I think, it's important to participate and to hear the various opinions. I think we like what we hear today, and we think that, the industry needs a lot of more commitment and FIDs in order to move forward. A brief introduction of who we are, like ship owners, so we are tonnage providers, effectively. We operate across all shipping segments, and the reason that we're here today is for our recent order of 4 CO2 carriers. So we have placed the first actually order for 22,000 CO2 carriers in Hyundai Mipo in South Korea. The vessels will be delivered in 26 and 27, and we expect that they will be utilized for the transportation of CO2 from 27 onwards. For us, I think, the technical discussion has been lengthy. We have been in various talks with shipyards, with providers, what the design should be. Our decision was to go with the low pressure, low temperature design. And the reason for this is to optimize and to reduce cost. As it was pointed before, in order for the industry to work, we need a reasonable cost base. And the way to do that is with low pressure designs. Otherwise, we believe that the capex for transportation of the CO2 will increase above, let's say, feasibility levels. The low pressure, so the advantage, let's say, of the low pressure design is obviously lower capex. But at the same time, we believe that there are some elements that also provide further advantages, like the reduction of the improvement in the purity of CO2 that's being transported with the low temperature during the liquefaction process. And at the same time, we think that going forward, as you said, one of the key elements would also be to kind of standardize the process of transportation of CO2. For us, what we would expect of ports, obviously, we would like to see standardization in the industry, meaning we would like to see more like low pressure designs, obviously, coming forward, or at least a decision around what design should be let's say, the key. Then, I think there is an element that the market hasn't quite anticipated, that usually you will need to consolidate more CO2 in, let's say, in key ports where you would have liquefaction, probably transportation with pipes in let's say, in key regions, whereby you would have larger quantities. And that means because CO2 is a heavy cargo, you will need deeper ports. We have found that, especially in Europe, in Northern Europe, there are some restrictions in terms of ports. So I think dredging will probably be one key element that we'll need to take into account going forward. And I think from our side, it's more important to hear what you guys have to say and how you see the market evolving. Our position is open, so we are in the market. We expect to transport CO2 going forward. We expect that there will be a significant bottleneck for transportation of CO2. If we were to meet the 50 million tons of CO2 until 2030, this means that we would need around, I don't know, maybe 50 ships. And one thing that we know very well is shipyards, and we know that shipyard capacity is not there to produce 50 ships until 2030. These ships are highly specialized. The tanks that carry CO2 are the production line for carrying CO2 is quite restricted. So we think that there will be a significant bottleneck going forward. We have done our part. We are there with ships to provide in the market when the market needs them. And it will be good to understand how you see FIDs, how we see ports getting ready around the transportation of CO2. And hopefully that ports will be ready by the time, in 27, 28, when the market starts picking up.
Thank you, Spiros. So what we see now, that there's already different type of CO2 ships. We see that Northern Lights are building medium pressure, you guys low pressure. So the market is already a little bit kind of not dividing, but taking shape. But if we then go to the next stakeholder, and that's port itself, Port Authority. I will ask Sophie from Port of Antwerp Bruges to present their CCS strategy. I think if we can put slides on.
Yeah, I had some slides prepared. I don't know if it's possible to show them.
You can start and then maybe
No problem. So thank you for giving me the floor. I was happy to hear already that ports are key in the CO2 infrastructure and in the CCS strategy of many of companies, but also of the European Union. So Port of Antwerp-Bruges is a port in the heart of Europe. It's not that far away. It's we have a platform in Antwerp, we have a platform in Bruges, but we are one company. There are a lot of numbers to talk about of the port, but just what you have to remain is that we're the largest integrated chemical cluster in Europe. So we really have a hub function as ports. We have a lot of chemical products going in and going out towards the European market. And that's also something that we see as an advantage for CO2. We see CO2 in the future as a real commodity. So the Antwerp Sea project was already mentioned. It's okay, the slides are here, thank you. It's the 6th slide, I think, or no. So you can skip this a bit. So that's our statistics. One more, I think. One more. Was going super fast. Yes, so this is the Antwerp at Sea project. So you see we have a lot of emitters at the Antwerp platform at the port. Those are at the right corner on the bottom. And they can capture their CO2 that goes via a backbone in the port area towards a liquefaction terminal where it can be stored. And then it can be from there on shipped towards an empty gas field in, for example, Norway. But it can also go via a backbone and then towards a CO2 pipeline in the Netherlands. Where you can click. And then one more. So for Antwerp, we also see CO2 incoming from the rest of Europe, the so-called hinterland, so the Walloon area, but also Germany. And then also via a backbone in the port area to a CO2 tank storage, and then shipped towards a sink, towards a permanent storage location. At the Zeebrugge platform, CO2 will also be incoming. From Antwerp or other parts in Europe. It can be there compressed by a CO2 compressor, and there will be a pipeline connection from Zeebrugge towards Norway, so it can be there stored permanently. One more click. CCU is something we also look at. So we have the Next Gen district where we really combine a lot of players in the circular economy, where CCU is also a great part of. Okay, go to the next one. Then just to focus on Antwerp at Sea, next one. Yeah, as to say, the aim of the project is to reduce the CO2 emissions at the port platform by 50% in 2030. So it's a big goal. You can go to the next one. The Antwerp at Sea project is a project with 6 big emitters in the port. So Air Liquide, BASF, Ineos, Borealis, Exxon, and Total Energies are the big 6 emitters that are part of the consortium. Then we have Fluxys, it's the Belgian gas TSO, and then Port of Antwerp-Bruges as a port authority that's being part of it. Yeah, that is the one I mentioned before, but the Kairos at Sea project, it's at the top left. Those are the 2 first emitters. So it's in the first phase that they will capture CO2. It's BASF and Air Liquide. And then it's the same story as I told already. It goes via the backbone towards in a pipeline towards the Netherlands, or being liquefied and then stored via ship in, for example, Norway or Denmark. The next one, we have the CO2 highway. That was a pipeline connection from Belgium towards Norway that's being built. Next one. Here's the hub function that we really see as port. So we see actually CO2 incoming by barge, by pipeline, by rail, or by truck. So all these forms are possible. Then we need the CO2 to leave the port. It's not our goal to keep it. So we see it leave the port via pipeline or via ship. Those two are also two possible ways that we now see. Can go to the next one. The CO2 pipeline is something that we now joined forces with Flexis. It's so the Belgian gas TSO, and we are building together on the development of a CO2 national pipeline network in Belgium. It's the joint venture that we got with Flexis, and then also with Socofe, which are more specialized in the Walloon area. So we have more of a Belgium story. You can skip this one. This is the plan of the CO2 backbone. And then last but not least, the next gen district is what I was telling, where all players of circular economy are combined on one plot of land in the port area in Antwerp, where CCU will also play a role. And then just to conclude, we are very happy for the policy and regulatory framework on European level, but also on national, regional level. It's needed to develop all these projects. So we welcome the CCS targets in the Net Zero Industry Act, and also the recognition of CCS as a strategic net zero technology. And we also welcome the industrial carbon management strategy. And there we see the challenges that we have now with CCS, like the permitting, but also cross-border infrastructure. We see them that is shared in this strategy. So that's very positive, and happy to collaborate upon it. Thank you.
Thank you, excellent. We finally also managed, thank you for a slide. Now, if we go to emitters side, Rob, what are your insights and the most rational way how CO2 transportation can be organized, and what do you expect from coming regulations after industrial carbon management strategy?
So many questions at the same time. My name is Rob van der Meer, and I'm at Cembiro. Cembiro is a European Cement Association. I'm there since 3 years, Industrial Policy Director. And before, I've been 25 years at a cement company in Germany. And to be honest, I have started to work on climate change and on CO2 measures already 30 years ago, or even longer. So I have worked a lot on these issues, but not that much on transport. That is relatively new. Capture was the starting point, and it is a little bit remarkable that in this discussion we start with the end of the CO2 value chain, storage, and then we do transport, and then we do the hubs. But we should start with the emitters, the producers of the CO2, not emitters in the future. The first point is that what you see now in the developments at the Commission and also in the EU Institute is a remarkable change in the last years. From zero, now nearly zero capture today, to 450 million tons in 2050, 25 years to go. That's a lot. And for 2030, it's mentioned 50 million tons. Of that 50 million tons, I think that the cement industry in 2030 will deliver about 1/3. That is, when you look at the innovation map that we have as Cembiro issued on cement projects in Europe, you see that about 12, perhaps 15 million tons, perhaps even more, will be available for storage, for use in 2030. So big volume. And that brings me to the transport. We can deliver that CO2, but it has to go somewhere. It might be used in plants for production of products, for mineralization, for recarbonation of concrete, but these volumes will be relatively small. So significant volume for the cement industry will go to storage. And that, I would say 50 million tons in 2030 already, has to be transported. And there's no point in this. Ports will play a major role in that discussion. There is no way, there's no other possibility for that. Pipelines will come, but it will be challenging if they come in time. And even for 2040, I see big challenges in the pipeline development. So perhaps with trucks or with railway, but the major part will be done by ships. And also a major part will be transported from the ports by ships to the storage sites in Europe. We should not forget, we are talking about Europe. We are not talking about Northern, Western Europe. We have to talk about the rest of Europe too. There is a lot of development needed in Southern and Eastern Europe. We should not forget it, because for me, it's simple. Cement industry is everywhere in Europe, not only in Northern or Western Europe. So we also have to find solutions for the CO2 that is going to be produced in 2030, 40, 50, in places where there will be no ships, at least not directly. So we have to find solutions for that prospect. Otherwise, we have a split situation in Europe in, say, 15 years, decarbonized Northern and Western Europe, perhaps including the UK, and the rest of Europe. So that is something that we have to take into consideration. And I think that is important. Apart from all these developments on standards and all the developments on what is to be done, we should not forget that split in Europe. But now let's look a little bit on why cement is important. What I mentioned already is that we will deliver about 1/3 of the storage or the CO2 volume in 2030. For sure, we will not deliver the 1/3 of the volume in 2050. So there is a huge volume coming on top of coming from industrial sources, from other sources. I'm not so sure that we should really focus too much on it. It is important, but I think we should focus first on somehow, we always call it hard to abate sectors, but on climate change, on carbon capture, the easy sectors to capture are the sectors with high concentrations of CO2 in their emissions. I can't help it, cement is one. And we have, and that is sometimes a very negative point, we have emissions that we can't abate. We can't reduce the process emissions from the limestone that we have as source of raw material. We can't do anything else than capture. I can't help it. And then something has to be done with that CO2. So for sure, CO2 from cement industry in 2050 could be a source for feedstock of the industry in Antwerp and other ports. And why should we not focus on that? I know that not everyone in this room likes that, but I think we have to think about it. Back to the transport issue. Ports will have a dominant role in that discussion. First, no escape possible. They will like it. They have a new role. That's beautiful. Beautiful volumes. But after 2030, we really have to think about other ways of the transport, the ships, the trucks, the railways, to the ports. And then what are we going to do that? So, and for me, that is an important step that we have to think about. It's mentioned now by the Commission. Thank you, Johanna. You mentioned a big volume of pipelines in 2050, 90,000 kilometers, I heard. Not only pipelines, it was transport. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the correction. If it would be pipeline, it would be a huge effort. And that brings me, in fact, to the point of you should not forget, we have to act now. And permitting for these things, not for the capture only, that is already a nightmare, but for doing something with that CO2, transport it, it will cost a lot of time. So if we want to act now and to have that, I would say 50 million tons for me in 2030, for me as cement industry, not me personally. So when I have to deliver the 50 million tons in 2030, and we are willing to do that, we really have to have the conditions in place that we can do. And that brings me to the last point, if that's allowed. A major issue not mentioned here is the energy that we will need. I'm doing now the calculations for the 2050 for Sembiro, and it is really amazing how much energy, renewable energy, we will need in 2030 and 2040 and 2050. We are not talking about tripling the volume of electrical energy that we need. It's more, tripling, perhaps 5 or 6 times as much, depending on the choices that we make. And I can't help it. Just to put a little bit of pressure here on the table. We have a lot of conditions to be fulfilled for the decarbonization. But the fundamental one, apart from all transport, which is also a fundamental one, the availability of renewable energy is a condition. Yeah, without it, it will not be possible. I don't see it. Really, you have an issue there. So ports play a dominant role, important role, but also in the energy transition. With that, I would like to close.
Thank you. Now from Brussels, maybe we can travel to Baltic states, to Latvia, and we have Evita from Švenk, Latvia, cement producer, and you're located 170 kilometers from Klaipėda's port, potentially hub for CO2 transportation, further for storage. What are your expectations from Port Authority and for those who are in CO2 transportation business to make it feasible, realistic once you capture CO2? Thank you.
No, thank you very much for inviting, and thanks indeed to all of you for efforts you put in this very important area, CCS, CCU. And indeed, I understand that my role today is to zoom in a bit and add a practical flavor or details to this topic. And if I may, Jānis, I will try to be a little bit broader, covering all the challenges we face. So Rob already mentioned a few, Peter mentioned other participants as well. But then I will try to be very practical. So what we face now, especially when it comes to our regional specifics. So indeed, so we have done a lot as a big emitter already so far, but as Rob already mentioned, there are these chemical process related emissions, which we really can't avoid, and CCS, CCU, these are the only solutions for these particular type of emissions. And establishment of CCS value chain as such, of course, is a very challenging task due to the fact that there are so many elements involved. Legal framework, different practicalities, shipbuilding, all sorts of issues which really at some point it seems that it is even difficult maybe to guess all of the complexities when we actually start thinking about it and start thinking about them and start building these value chains. So already for a few years we have been in that process. We have established one very particular specific value chain. It is called the CCS Baltic Consortium, consisting of our company, Švenk Latvia. Given the size of our country, we have only one cement plant in the country. Same applies to Lithuania. We have a sister cement plant there. So Baltic Consortium, from the emitters' perspective, consists of these two cement plants. KN Energies, so terminal operator in Klaipėda port in Lithuania, is also part of this consortium, and MOL and Larvik Shipping. So these shipping companies are also part of this consortium. So we have been awarded a project of common interest status, thus making this project eligible for Connecting Europe facility. And we are moving forward, of course, with this project, but at the same time, we all have to acknowledge that at the end of the day, especially if we look long term, actually CCS, CCU value chains will be part of green economy, and it will have to be business case to be part in these value chains. So And we are happy to see really developments in this regard. We also have to acknowledge, of course, that our region, if we look at the Baltics, is lagging behind. And I would then like further to focus on the key challenges we face. So far, actually, there is zero infrastructure for that, as you mentioned, Jānis. So we have to tackle the distance between our plants and the port, be it Klaipėda and actually be it any other ports in the region. In the short run, We are looking into railway possibilities because we also understand, of course, the challenges related to pipeline construction. But of course, from all perspectives, in the long run, pipeline solutions would be the ones that should be there. So far, there is no positive legal framework if we specifically talk about Latvia. So first of all, thanks to all EU institutions for really pushing these issues ahead and really please keep pushing, keep educating the national member states, national institutions, because sometimes there is a feeling that they think, okay, let everybody else do stuff. We will see how it works out, and then we will also participate if this is successful. And really, so there are specifics, especially now when it comes to even national climate and energy plan in Latvia. So there is a very critical Commission recommendation regarding it currently, because when it comes to CCS, for instance, it contains only one paragraph mentioning or imposing on big emitters to have these solutions by 2040 without anything else. So no funding, no policy developments, no legal framework developments, nothing. So just, you know, be on your own, make your own solutions. Also, I think there is this general lack of understanding in the public sector that these are the new conditions. This is the green transformation. This is the new economy. This is the new business. This is the new way of how business will be organized, and that actually we, as part of the EU business environment, will have to remain competitive. And now we kind of are in a situation that businesses are doing much more. They are much more ahead than actually the public sector is being able, you know, to follow it with the public policies, with the legal framework enabling the green transformation. And it also is the case of promotion of circular economy, where we see even legal obstacles for, let's say, using something secondhand or recycling and so forth. So there are many issues which I could mention. So thanks again, EU. Please keep pushing. This is it in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you, Evita. Then before we go to Q&A session, I think it's good to conclude the initial speeches by you, Anel, and maybe you can comment from European Seaports Organization. Are the port authorities actually informed enough about this new business or new economy, how Evita just call it, and are there willingness from port authorities to invest or to incentivize, even like allocating space or to establish CCS terminals? And what would be necessary? How do you think for port authorities to invest even further in that infrastructure? We saw Port of Antwerp, Bruges, but there are so much more ports and so all around the Europe. So can you comment on awareness about CCS among them?
Thank you, Yanis. And first, thank you for inviting me and organizing this event. So thank you, Mr. Rasmussen, Bellona, and Danish Shipping. It's great to close this round of speakers who mentioned a lot of elements and challenges already. So just to say who is ESPO, the European Seaports Organization. We represent the port authorities of the seaports of 21 maritime member states of the EU and Norway as well at the EU political level. So just to start, I would like to say that we welcome the EU strategy on CCS. as well as the Net Zero Industry Act targets on the CO2 storage. The fact that we need to reach net zero, I think it's really the common goal of everyone here. We agree on that, and ports are really part of the solution. We've said it before, because we always say ports are emitters, or it's a location where many emissions come together, but they're also really part of the solution. And actually, the role of the port authorities and port managing bodies have been evolving. Well, especially first, I would like to say that usually they're publicly owned in many parts. So you really see this public interest role of the port authorities, but they're now asked more and more to have a commercial role as well. But yeah, the port are mission-driven entities. And with these new roles, it's actually coming on top of the traditional roles of the port. So it's not just replacing. So the ports still have to do what they're doing at the moment, but now they're becoming more and more energy hubs as well. And actually, we've seen it in our publication on trends on port governance, published in 22. It's really confirming what we have seen already before, that the ports are publicly owned, but taking more and more, the commercial role. So with this changing role, and it comes also new business, and also, for example, new customers for the Port Authority, because now they have to talk with energy companies. It's also something quite new, but it's good that we see CO2 becoming a commodity. And it's interesting since now in the new 10T, we see that to get the status, there's not only the tonnage that's important for ports to get the status, but also the contribution of the ports in the energy transition. So it's actually very good, and we welcome that as well. And so on transport specifically, we will be expecting the legislative package on the CO2 transport. Also would be good to have the IMO guidelines on the CO2 transport by sea, because I think the certainty of this policy framework is really needed for the port authorities, but also for all stakeholders, I think, to make long-term investment, because a port is not working with a 3-year window. It's much longer, so it really needs this certainty. And we mentioned also previously, there's not only transport by ship, but transport by rail, inland waterway, trucks, all this multimodal transport. So this is also important to keep in mind. But so the role of the ports in this energy project, because Rob mentioned also, it's not only about CCS, but all different energy, clean energies, to ease the green energy transition. So really ports are an enabler, starter for the project. They're usually taking the risk. They're also co-investing. So they're really trying to be matchmaker between the different project partners to get the project off the ground. So they really have this connector role, also a facilitator. And I'm saying a lot of different words, but it's because each port will really have its own role. It really will depend on each port because they're all different. And so it will depend on the business model that they will choose. And at the moment, we see CCS mostly in the big industrial ports, but this will probably be open to many other ports, because you cannot have everything in every port, but each port can play a different role in the value chain. I also wanted to mention this aggregation platform with the small emitters. It's very good to have that, because the port can also act as a facilitator in this. And my last point then would be about the funding, because what would be a speech without funding? So EU funding is really key. Also with the new 10E list, we've seen many CO2 network projects. That's really good. let's see, CEF-E, CEF transport, why not? Because now the energy criteria is recognized in 10T. We will also need member state funding and the private investment as well. But so in all these funding supports, we need to keep the value chain approach, because if we don't, I mean, it's not useful to support just one part of the value chain, because it doesn't help the rest. So really keep that into mind. And if I may continue on the incentive, or the willingness of ports to make these investments in CCS, or to be part at least of the value chain. We have seen, so in the report that I was mentioning on the port governance, that 2/3 of the port authorities and managing bodies that have been responding to our survey are securing land to generate or support the clean energy. So they're really having this landlord role, but it's the space is really important, but it's also an issue, because as I was saying, the new roles about clean energy, they really come on top of the traditional roles. So there's not only going to be CCS in the port, there's also all the other activities. So the space has really become an issue, but also the permitting, and that has been mentioned before as well. We need easier permitting for this project. And my last point, but I think it's still important to mention, is the importance to raise awareness of the public, because the community acceptance is really important. A port, it needs its license to operate, and this is thanks to the community around that will accept it. And with these new businesses also come new skills, new need for labor, so it will also have some social impact. So I think that was important to mention as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Excellent summarizing to some extent as well. Now, questions. And as we have hybrid event, we can have a question from the audience, but also from live stream. And I could ask Rasmus from Danish Shipping if you could maybe come with one question from online, and then one question from here.
Yes, thank you very much, Janis. So I encourage everyone online and also here in the room to participate with questions and to take the floor. I would like to start with a question from Carl Lindahl from BIMCO online. He's asked about the existing infrastructure and how that can be changed into transporting CO2. So I think it's a good question for you, Peter, to answer to. The question being, is the existing infrastructure for storing and transporting liquefied and compressed petroleum gases and petrochemical gases suitable for CO2, or are the characteristics of CO2 sufficiently distinct from necessitated dedicated infrastructure?
That was a quite technical and complicated question to answer. It depends a bit on the infrastructure we are talking about. Are we talking about, for instance, offshore installations? Are we talking about refurbishment of ships, tankers, and so on? I can deal with, you can say, the offshore part. Corrosion is one of the hugest, large challenges when we are talking about storing CO2, but also impurities could be an issue, clogging up the reservoirs. So you can say that was why we used food grade CO2 last year when we took CO2 from Ineos oxide in Antwerp and transported it to the Danish part of North Sea to be quite sure that we had a quite pure CO2. But we re-injected in existing well, and we saw some very positive results. So you can control it, actually, if you have a quite pure CO2. But of course, if you have a specification within Europe that only demands food grade, it will be very costly as well. So of course, we have to find ways where we can actually, perhaps in the future, find a balance between having a very high specification for purity of CO2 and at the same time not risking anything, because that is the most important thing about CCS. It has to be done safely. Otherwise, we lose any confidence in the public. So it needs to be done the right way. I know that's something that the EU are looking at specifications as well. That's something I think both transporters and source providers are looking very much into. But it's difficult to get a very clear answer on this. It depends on the infrastructure we are talking about. Sorry.
Thank you. Do we have any questions in the room? And also speakers, feel free to disagree, agree with each other, and if you have something to add to nail some of the elements. Go on, please.
I would just pick up on some of the points made by some of the other speakers here, and that is the interfaces with other transportation means, which is so important when we are talking about the usage of ports in the future. Because if we can't transport by trucks or rails directly to these ports, they are perhaps not that important in the future, to be honest. So that is something that the ports need to look into to secure those interfaces, because we can't get anything directly to the ports if we have emitters lying far away from the ports, especially in the near future, because it's very costly to establish pipelines over far distances. So we need to transport things by rivers, prams, railways and trucks in the near future towards 2030. And that needs to be secured at the relevant harbors. Otherwise, you're not relevant as a harbor. So a very important point.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to jump in? Yeah, Johanna?
Yeah, now it's working. Thank you. So first, to comment on the reuse or repurposing of existing infrastructure, just to highlight that this is also an action point in our strategy to look into that, because we see it as a cost-effective option, and to some extent it could be technically feasible. However, like you said, there are some issues to look into more, such as corrosion. So this is something that we will assess further. And then I realized I forgot to highlight the CO2 projects under the PCI and PMI list that was published last year. And it's really encouraging to see that we now have 14 CO2 projects. Just a couple of years ago, we only had a few. And in December, we awarded the CEF funding to 5 of them. So I think it's a very positive development. So congrats to all involved, and we hope to see even more in the future. And then I would like to encourage you to help me a bit, actually, because in the GRC study, we see that we need some more data going ahead. We will make new editions of the study, but we need more data, especially on costs. And in the current study, we just assume that the cost of offshore pipelines are the same as CO2 shipping, but we know that this is not the case. So we need more data on costs, and I'm looking to find those numbers. But there are some gaps, like I said. We are leaning on the experience of US projects so far. But since we know that the transport infrastructure will look quite different in Europe, maybe they're not as applicable to look at after all. So if you have more data on costs, and especially shipping, I would be very happy to receive those. Thanks.
Excellent. Rasmus, maybe we can take another one from online.
Sure, thank you very much. We have a question from William. It's not specified. anything more. But nonetheless, he's talking about the standardization of CO2. And I think this question would be aimed at you, Johanna, as well. But also, of course, it would be interesting to hear from the industry itself. The question being, any thoughts of standardized rules for the CCS industry coming out at EU level?
Sure. So thanks again. I think this relates to what Peter also was saying about the need to have some minimum standards on CO2 streams. This is also an action point that we have in the strategy, and this is one of the priorities for this year, I would say, because up until now we have seen that there is quite a fragmented market. We see that projects or countries are shaping their own standards more on a project or case-to-case basis. But even for Northern Lights, they have different customers, so it could complicate the picture a bit. So like I said, the whole idea is to create a single market for CO2 in Europe and to ensure that we need harmonization. So, but as Peter also touched upon, we need to balance it because stakeholders in the value chain will have different interests. So we need to find the right balance between costs and risks, and to also to balance the need for urgency with flexibility. So what we want to do now is to take a step back and get a better understanding of what is needed, so we don't set standards too early and creating unintended consequences also for the projects under development. However, I think this will also be important to create predictability for future capture facilities, for example. So yeah, it's a very important topic. Thanks.
I can react on this. It is a really challenging issue that the standardization on the CO2 quality and the impurities of the materials. There is an ISO group, so International Standardization Organization group, working on it. And they are putting the levels quite high, meaning the purity of the materials that you have, that the CO2 that is coming out of that standard is high, meaning high costs. Food grade solution mentioned by Peter is a solution for safety use. I can understand that. On the other hand, there is a SEN group, so from the European standardization body, started last month on the same topic. And we try to find, I would say, practical solutions in that SEN group. I'm part of it. We try to find practical solutions on what are the minimum requirements for the CO2 purity and all that, how much oxygen, how much water, and all other materials can be in the gases that we are going to store or use. Now, for use, there is something else than for storage. So the geological storage, you have perhaps other conditions. So that is already a difference. The transport, it was clear here, mentioned by Spiros, they are working on low pressure, low temperature solutions. That is not the solutions that everyone will take that route. So we have different solutions and therefore different conditions. It will be very complicated. The general message is the higher you put your conditions, the higher you put the purity of the materials that you use, the safer, of course, it is, beyond any doubt. Corrosion, when you have only CO2, you don't have corrosion. But the moment that you have a little bit of oxygen in it, it becomes challenging. And the more oxygen, the more water, it becomes more challenging. So the higher the purity, the better it is from a perspective of the end user and storage, which is nice, because then you put the burden on the producer of the CO2. The moment that you go too low, the danger becomes bigger, and it is. So we really have to find a way out of it, because the solution that Peter mentioned is nice for the first time of a project. I would do the same. Food grade material to transport for the first time, I would do exactly the same. But it is not the solution for 2050 with the 450 million tons. Because then we are putting a lot of effort, a lot of money, a lot of energy, especially in things that doesn't make sense at all. So that we have to really come with solutions. Sorry.
Peter and then Thomas.
Yeah, just to take up the challenge from Rob, because I totally agree with you. You can say in the beginning, it's quite easy you can make a risk assessment when you know the emitter, you know the grade of the CO2 and the impurities. Then it's quite easy to actually make an assessment of your existing infrastructure. But when we are facing, you can say, a pipeline backbone within Europe where you put your CO2 in and you mix it up, then suddenly you haven't got any clue on what's coming in if you haven't got the right specifications. And then you are endangering a lot of things, including the transport. And are we then quite sure that the thing will stay down in the ground? No, we are not. So we have to do this right the first time. And I know it's costly. And we have to find new ways to perhaps clean up the CO2. Something new to study for, you can say.
Just in addition, when you go from 98.5% CO2 to, say, 99.5%, it is 10 to 50% additional energy that you have to put in. And when you put that same CO2 with 99.5% in the pipeline of the Port of Antwerp, and at the same time other people put in 98.5, you are really doing stupid things. So we really have to think about what we are going to do.
Thomas, do you want to follow up on this or bring a new aspect?
No, this is a new aspect. So, but obviously, I hate breaking up an interesting debate here, of course. But I'd like to bring Spiros into the conversation here as well. There's been a lot of talk about the business case. There's been and talk about de-risking of investments, of course, which is only natural in this particular sense. And I have to commend Capital Group and Capital Gas for taking the transportation issue out of the chicken and egg equation that we're constantly talking about in a CCS context, which also sort of leads me to my question to you, is whether you could elaborate a little bit more on your thinking behind making this sort of strategic investment into the value chain of CCS and especially on transportation. And my second question is whether the vessels that you are receiving in 26, 27 are primarily for port-to-port operations, or whether they are also for port-to-site or offshore operations as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I will answer your question first, but then I will touch a bit upon the discussion that was previously held regarding the purities. I think let's start from the last one. In terms of the ships are designed for port-to-port. They have they have some flexibility. They're equipped with bow and stern thrusters, so they could be, let's say, side by side in an FSU or an offshore platform, but they are not DP vessels. They are not designed in order to inject directly into a well. Those are very specialized vessels. We have discussed with a few guys in the room actually, and I think though that's a very, very expensive solution. And my view is that if you have the injection capability on board the vessel, then you actually lose capacity because you will be utilizing it 1/5, 1/10 of the time, regardless. It has to do with what the specific voyage is. So effectively, it won't be an efficient way to operate. I think the most efficient probably is using FSU type, or that will inject and that will take the ship side by side and then inject the CO2. In terms of the thinking that was behind, I think what we know well is there are two things: shipping material, shipping commodities around, and shipyards. In terms of shipping, we see that we said 50 million tons by the end of 2030, and then 450 million tons by the end of 2050. So that will require a lot of ships. And we thought that for us, it makes sense to be positioned in this market, to actually have a constant point of reference because when everyone is talking about low pressure, mid pressure, I understand. And this goes back to the discussion we had previously regarding Northern Lights and our decision to go a bit outside of that. It's a matter of size. If you go to to larger sizes ships, like if you go above 20,000 cubes, low pressure is one way. I don't think there is any way that you can go mid pressure or for 20, 40, 60,000 cube vessels. For us, initially, the design, because we like to do things in scale, and most of our fleet consists of big ships, let's say, in their category. We were looking at 40,000, 60,000 cubes, and we thought that the market would be a bit, let's say, immature in 26, 27, 28 until 2030 for this kind of ships. So that's why we went with the 22,000 cubes. But going for larger, to scale up the industry, you have to go low pressure. There is no way. You're talking, if you build a ship that will carry medium pressure at 40,000 cubes for medium pressure, you would be talking, I don't know, with today's numbers, on a 350 million ship. So 400, probably one of the most expensive vessels to be built out there. So to us, it doesn't really make sense, and we think that the market will stabilize towards low pressure design as it scales up. I hope I answered the question, and just to touch a bit on the impurities, for us as well, this is a very important fact, and this is something that we are working a lot with our with our different subcontractors. And we are looking, while the initial consideration was always the Northern Lights, let's say, spec, which is close to food grade spec, we are looking into reducing the quality of, increasing the impurities intake that we can have, and go down to 99.5. I think that to us, and I would like to hear what you guys think, this is a good target for the market, for the industry, the 99.5, so that you can actually reduce significantly the cost of CO2. And going back to low pressure, mid pressure, low pressure helps towards that, because during the liquefaction process, you actually have a lot of the impurities. Let's say you lose a lot of the impurities during the liquefaction process, so you end up with a higher purity CO2 at -50 versus -30.
Thank you. One of the reasons why we talk about ports in this context is not only about the shipping side, but it's also how we can scale it up with industrial clusters. So I think we talked for this roundtable enough about purities and low and medium pressure. There's definitely room for further discussions, and it's crucial to have right cost, right opportunities to plug in whatever terminals there will be established. So we have a little bit time, maybe for one last question from online or from the room. Sure.
Yeah. Good morning. My name is Rolf Bakker. I work for Value Maritime, and Value Maritime is all about onboard carbon capture. I've heard a lot of discussions on, of course, infrastructure, carbon capture, utilization, storage, energy. I think a very good remark. What I've missed in the discussion so far, and it's more, a remark and a question, has to do with taxation, import taxes, etc. When we see in the future, for instance, capturing carbon on board of liquid CO2 carriers, we will be bringing that CO2 back into ports for further handling. And what we see now, we're having good discussions on this with the Dutch authorities. But we see quite a lot of discussion on taxation, import taxes, etc., from regulators when it comes to, let's say, the transport of CO2. So I'm curious to hear what, for instance, the European Commission has to say about this. Thank you.
Okay. Should I comment on that? To be honest, I am not familiar with that specific taxation issue, I would be happy to follow up bilaterally. But just to say that also on board CCS on ship was mentioned in the strategy. So and even on the second page, I believe. So it could also be an emerging technology to look into. But I'm sorry, I cannot really comment any further on that. Sorry.
I have information that Rob can even expand
No.
taxation.
Not on taxation, but I think that what we are looking now on is the discussion on what we are going to do with the CO2 in Europe. Now, let's make it a little bit broader than only the EU 27. We are also looking at Norway, yes. We are looking at the UK, not mentioned yet, I believe here. But what about the storage and use of CO2 in other places close to Europe, Northern Africa, Turkey, perhaps a little bit beyond? And I really think that we should think about that. And that is coming back to my point, what I said before, about Southern and Eastern Europe, where we have a real challenge coming up. If there are no storage sites in Southern Europe, and what I have seen until now is that there are storage sites, but if they are big enough is a good question, there might be solutions outside the traditional EU 27. And how do we deal with that? And it is short time, again. So I'm not putting pressure on the Commission. Sorry, Joanna, I don't want to have an answer for you. It would be nice, but I think that remark is really necessary to think about. What does it mean when we only look at Europe? We have a lot to do, for sure, but I think that we should look a little bit broader.
All right, Peter, but we really need to wrap it up. But
Just a short remark on Rob's quite provoking statement. Representing a European storage provider, of course, I have the position that the EU should, of course, try to look into their own possibilities before we look abroad. We are talking about a lot of CO2 to be transported, captured, and stored. That means a lot of jobs within the EU. And every time you send a ton of CO2 outside the EU, you also attach some money and some jobs. Worth thinking about. Otherwise, you create another dependency like we had about the Russian gas. Is that a good thing to introduce again? I don't think so.
all right, so maybe on this note, I can conclude this wonderful roundtable and express my gratitude to all the speakers, to Mr. Rasmussen for hosting this event, to Danish Shipping, to my colleagues behind the scenes from Bellona who made this happen. And yeah, we will follow speedy CCS deployment all around the industrial clusters, all around Europe. And I wish you a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.